The night Sylvie Crane refused to clear a patient for early discharge, she had no idea she was signing herself into the most dangerous situation of her life. She was 26, a second-year nursing student, doing her clinical rotation at Northwestern Memorial, surviving on 4 hours of sleep and gas station coffee. She had calluses on her feet from 12-hour shifts and a notebook full of pharmacology mnemonics she'd written in the margins of her grocery lists. She was nobody in the grand scheme of things. Nobody important. Nobody with enemies. That was before Dominic Harker's son showed up on Ward 7. His name was Colt Harker, 18 years old, admitted after a motorcycle accident on Lake Shore Drive. He'd been going 93 miles per hour in a 40 zone. The ER had stabilized him. Imaging came back clear on the skull, but his attending physician, Dr. Reyes, had flagged a concern about intracranial pressure and ordered a 24-hour observation hold. Standard procedure, nothing dramatic. Colt didn't think so. He was the kind of young man who had never once in his life been told to wait. Sylvie figured that out within 45 seconds of entering his room to take his vitals. He was sitting up in bed, already in street clothes, already had his phone in hand, and he looked at her the way people look at vending machines when they've already decided which button to push. "Get me the discharge form," he said. Not a question, not a hello. Sylvie set down her tablet and wrapped the blood pressure cuff around his arm. "Good evening to you too, Mr. Harker. I need to get your 6 o'clock readings before anything else." I said, "Get me the discharge form." His voice had the particular quality of someone who had never had to repeat himself. "I've been in this bed for 6 hours. I'm fine. I'm leaving, Doctor." "Ray's placed a hold on your chart," she said, keeping her voice even. 24-hour observation. "That doesn't expire until 9:42 tomorrow morning." He stared at her, like she had said something in a language he didn't speak. "Do you know who my father is?" Sylvie finished recording his BP, 122/81, slightly elevated, which she noted, and unwrapped the cuff with a practiced click. "I know you had a significant head trauma this afternoon, Mr. Harker. I know Dr. Reyes wants another set of neuro checks before anyone signs off on you. And I know that if I clear you and something happens at home tonight, that's on me." She met his eyes. "So no, I'm not getting you the discharge form." The shift supervisor found her 20 minutes later. "Sylvie." Margot Chen's voice was careful. Too careful. The careful of someone who had been on the phone with administration. "Can I talk to you for a second?" They stood in the hallway just outside the medication room. Margot was one of the most competent nurses Sylvie had ever met. 20 years in, seen everything, and right now she looked like a woman walking on ice she wasn't sure would hold. The family has been in contact with the hospital. Margot chose every word like she was choosing from a minefield. They're strongly requesting, a re-evaluation of the hold. The hold is Dr. Reyes's call, not mine. Dr. Reyes has been unavailable for the last 40 minutes. Sylvie looked at her. Margot looked away. Someone from Harker's. Someone reached out to the chief of medicine's office directly. A pause. Sylvie. These are not people you want to be on the wrong side of. She'd heard of Dominic Harker the way everyone in Chicago had heard of him. The way you hear thunder before a storm, not sure where it's coming from but certain it's close. He wasn't in the news. Men like him were never in the news. But he was in everything else. The port contracts, the city planning decisions that benefited certain developers, the union agreements that always seemed to break the right way. He ran things. Everyone knew it. Nobody said it. "Margot," Sylvie said slowly, "what exactly are you asking me to do?" The older nurse pressed her lips together. "I'm telling you to be careful. And if I say I'm already being careful, I'm being careful about that boy's intracranial pressure. Then I'm telling you the same thing again. Be careful." Sylvie went back to the room, took the 10 o'clock neuro check herself. Colt Harker didn't speak to her once. Just watched her with that flat, unimpressed expression like he was cataloguing something. She charted everything meticulously. Pupil response, grip strength, orientation, every question answered correctly, and left the room with her back straight and her hands steady, even though her heart was doing something unpleasant behind her ribs. At 11:15, a man she'd never seen before appeared at the nurse's station. He was in a dark suit, early 40s, with the quiet, contained energy of someone who had been trained to be present without being noticed. He set a business card on the counter in front of her and said, very politely, "Miss Crane. Mr. Harker Sr. would like a moment of your time." She looked at the card. A phone number. Nothing else. "Tonight?" she asked. "Now," he said. The thing about fear Sylvie had learned in 2 years of nursing was that it felt different from the inside than it looked from the outside. She'd held the hands of patients who were terrified and looked completely calm. She understood now. Standing at that nurse's station with a business card in her hand, and a polished stranger watching her, that she was one of those people. She called her program coordinator, left a voicemail she tried to make sound normal. She texted her roommate the name Dominic Harker and the address on the business card. Then she put on her coat, picked up her bag, and followed the man in the dark suit out of the hospital. The car was a black Escalade. There were 2 more men inside, quiet, professional, watching everything. Nobody spoke during the 20-minute drive north. The neighborhoods changed outside the tinted windows. She watched Chicago slide past, the bright fractured lights of the magnificent mile, then residential streets, then a gate, then a long private drive lined with winter oaks. The house was enormous, not in a showy way, no floodlit fountains, no ostentatious signage, just the quiet enormity of real, serious money. Stone and glass, modern but heavy, built to last. There was nothing warm about it from the outside. It looked like a decision. She was brought through a side entrance, down a hallway with dark wood floors, and into a study. Dominic Harker was standing by the window when she walked in. She'd expected something more theatrical. She wasn't sure what, a throne-like chair, a dramatic backlight, the classic movie villain staging. Instead, he was just a man, somewhere around 50, in a charcoal sweater and dark slacks, holding a glass of something amber and looking out at the frozen back garden. He turned when she entered, and she understood immediately why people were afraid of him. It wasn't his size, though he was tall. It wasn't his expression, which was, if anything, tired rather than threatening. It was the stillness. He occupied a room the way large, old things occupied space, the way a ship occupies a harbor. Completely, inevitably. "Miss Crane," he said. "Thank you for coming." She almost laughed, like she'd had a choice, "Mr. Harker." She kept her voice professional, clinic voice, the one she used when she needed to deliver information a patient wouldn't want to hear. He gestured to a chair. She sat. He remained standing, not to intimidate her, she realized, but because he seemed like a man who rarely sat when he could stand. There was something restless at the core of him, carefully managed. "My son tells me you refused to clear him for discharge," he said. "That's correct. He also tells me you were somewhat dismissive when he explained who his father was." "I was focused on his intracranial pressure readings," she said, which at the time warranted continued monitoring. A beat of silence. Dominic Harker studied her the way she'd seen certain ending physicians study a scan, looking for something specific, not reacting until they found it. "Do you know what I do, Miss Crane? I have some idea, and knowing that." A pause. "You still kept him there." The hold was Dr. Reyes's order. I was enforcing a medical hold. If your son had gone home tonight and developed a subdural hematoma at 2 in the morning, she stopped, made herself breathe. "It's not a theoretical risk, Mr. Harker. It's the reason the protocol exists." He turned back to the window. The garden outside was dark and still, snow on the ground between the trees. He was quiet for long enough that Sylvie began measuring her own breathing. "My son," he said finally, "has spent 18 years being told that his last name was a key that opened every door." His voice was level. There was something careful underneath the levelness, like a river that looked calm because it was running very deep. "I built what I built so that my family would never have to be afraid of anything. I didn't build it so that my son would learn to be something I can't stand." She didn't say anything. "He called you from the hospital." Dominic turned from the window. "He called me from the hospital to get you removed." "And I had a meeting tonight, Miss Crane. A meeting I cancelled because my 18-year-old son picked up the phone to get a nurse fired rather than lie in a hospital bed for 12 more hours. That must have been frustrating, she said, and then immediately was not sure whether that was the right thing to say. Something crossed his face. Not a smile exactly. The ghost of one. My son is going to stay in that hospital until the hold expires, he said. I'd like to personally ensure that you experience no professional consequences for your decision tonight, she blinked. That's, she regrouped. I appreciate that, but I was just doing my job. Which is exactly why I'm here, he said quietly. She didn't know what to do with that. She sat with it for a moment, then set it aside for later processing, because she was fairly certain that if she thought about it too hard right now, she might have some kind of stress response, and she was not going to do that in Dominic Harker's study. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He tilted his head, which she took as permission. "You knew about the way Colt behaves. The entitlement, she chose the word carefully. You knew it was happening." A long pause. "I did, and you didn't." She stopped herself. "Correct myself sooner," he finished. His voice had gone quieter. "No." He looked back at the window. "I told myself it was the age, that he'd grow into it, that the things I was building would eventually mean something to him beyond just what it could get him." A pause. "I was wrong about the timeline." "He's 18, she said. "That's not too late." He looked at her. Something shifted in the room, the way the air shifts right before weather changes. "You're very certain about that?" "People change. I've seen it." She hesitated. "I see it in my patients, people at their worst, and then they get better. Or they decide to. It's not inevitable, but it's possible." He watched her for a moment longer than was comfortable, and then he set his glass down on the desk. "I'll have Marcus drive you back to the hospital." She stood, picked up her bag, made it 3 steps toward the door. "Miss Crane," she turned. "Colt is going to have a conversation with Dr. Reyes in the morning, a real one, about what happened and what could have happened." His jaw shifted. "I wanted you to know." She nodded once. "Thank you. You should know," he added, and something in his voice made her stop moving entirely, "that the people who work for me, the men you rode with tonight, treated you with more courtesy than my son did." He said it like a fact. Just a fact he was noting. "I noticed that." She didn't have anything to say to that, so she just nodded again and followed Marcus back down the hallway. The drive back was quieter than the drive out somehow. Or maybe she was just occupying it differently. She sat in the back seat watching the city re-emerge outside the tinted window. The lights, the movement, the ordinary Tuesday night life of Chicago, and she felt something strange and hard to name settle in her chest. Marcus dropped her at the hospital entrance without a word. She went back to the nurse's station. Margot was there, and the look on Margot's face when Sylvie walked in, that brace for impact look, slowly rearranged itself into something Sylvie couldn't quite read. "You're back," Margot said. "I'm back." Sylvie pulled up Colt's chart on the monitor. "I need to log the 10 o'clock neuro check and document that the family has been informed the hold will run its full course." Margot stared at her. That's it. A pause. "What happened over there?" Sylvie thought about the study, the dark garden, the stillness of a man standing at a window with a weight on him that she suspected had been there for years and that nobody around him was allowed to acknowledge. "His dad agreed with us," she said simply. She finished her shift at 7 in the morning. The hold expired at 9:42. Dr. Reyes, who had reappeared sometime around midnight without explanation, signed the discharge papers himself, and Colt Harker left the ward without saying a word to Sylvie. She was in the break room when it happened. She'd been on her way out, coat on, bag over her shoulder, running on fumes and the kind of hollow post-shift exhaustion that made everything slightly unreal. She was standing at the coffee maker because it was automatic at this point, just her hands going through the motion when the door opened. She expected Margot, or one of the other students from her cohort. It was Colt. He stood in the doorway in his jacket, keys in his hand, looking at a point somewhere to the left of her shoulder. Up close, without the hospital bed and the entitled sprawl, he was just a kid. a kid with the particular blankness of someone who had prepared himself for something difficult. "My dad said I should apologize," he started. She waited. He exhaled. "And I'm not. I know that's a bad way to start an apology. I know." He looked at her then, 18 years old, with the beginning of something uncertain in his expression, like a wall with one brick starting to shift. "You were right to keep me." I looked up the thing, the pressure thing, the subdural hematoma. "Yeah." He swallowed. "Yeah." I looked it up. A pause that seemed to cost him something. "I'm sorry for how I talked to you." I was. He seemed to be searching for a word that wasn't an excuse. He didn't find one, so he just stopped there. "I'm sorry." Sylvie looked at him for a moment, thought about what she'd said to his father. "It's not inevitable, but it's possible." "Thank you," she said, "for coming to say that." He nodded, looked at the floor, then almost to himself, barely audible. "My dad's not usually wrong about people." He left before she could respond. She stood in the break room for a long moment after he was gone, coffee going cold in her hand, thinking about what that meant. What it said about a 50-year-old man who ran a city from the shadows that he had driven across town at 11 at night to sit across from a nursing student and tell her she'd been right. She thought about it on the train home. She thought about it while she was falling asleep at noon with the curtains pulled and the city noise bleeding through her window. She thought about it the way you think about something that doesn't fit the existing categories. You keep picking it up, turning it over, looking for where it belongs. She didn't have an answer. She wasn't sure she needed one yet. 3 days later, a package arrived at the hospital addressed to her. No return name. Inside was a book, a heavy, well-worn copy of the Merck Manual 21st edition, with a handwritten note tucked into the front cover. The handwriting was precise and unhurried. For someone who already knows how to use it, DH. Sylvie sat with it in the break room for a long time. The hospital hummed around her. Monitors beeping, the PA system crackling. Someone's sneakers squeaking down the linoleum hallway, and she turned the book over in her hands and felt the strange, certain weight of a story that wasn't finished yet. She was nobody, nobody important, nobody with enemies. That had been true a week ago. She wasn't entirely sure it was true anymore. Not because she'd become important in the way Colt Harker thought importance worked, not because of power or name or what you could take from someone, but because something had shifted in the space where she'd stood her ground and held it, and sometimes that was enough to change the kind of story you were living in. She put the book in her bag, took the stairs back to the ward, and went back to work.